And just like that, the ghost with the most has arrived in the chat. How is everyone doing this evening? I have a purple cocktail that I think is pretty awesome. Thanks, Jessica. And I made it myself. I'm very proud of it. I'm still like, dude, I did a good job with that. I amaze myself sometimes. Yes. So how is everybody? Yes, excellent. Good to see y'all here. Sorry we took a little gap week last week. Things got crazy. Hey, Bobby. No, it is not Purple Passion by Everclear, but that is a good guess. It is, so what's in the purple cocktail? So the purple cocktail, my lovelies, is Empress Gin, which comes like a blue color. Like it's more like an indigo color, but it changes color based on whatever mixers you put in it. So this is just a basic gin and tonic. So when I added the tonic water, it turned it purple. And it's delicious. I'm not a gin fan by any means, but it is quite tasty. So welcome back. Welcome back to the special little corner with the weird crimson stains. The Dead Hours presents the Murder Corner, back from a short hiatus, and I am the ghoul babe and the ghost with the most, Vivian. That's me. Yeah, dude, that's really fucking good. Like, it is. I don't like gin. Not my thing. But that is delicious. It is quite tasty. I'm excited. So how do you, if you've never tried gin, usually gins taste like a lot like Christmas trees. They have they're made from juniper berries, which have this very distinct like piney flavor to them, which can be really overwhelming if you're not into it. But this is made with some other things, so you don't have that like heavy pine flavor. You could make this a sweet drink, Jessica, if you added a couple other things. Like you can add, there's all kinds of things you can add to it. I have a rose lemonade in the fridge that I kind of want to try with it. So yeah, Bombay gin. Yeah, if you like dry gin, you'll probably like it. Anyways, cocktails aside, I'm just excited about this purple color right now. So we're back from a short hiatus off of our serial killer high with the 2-part John Wayne Gacy episode. I was really trying to make this one a 1-part episode, but here's the problem. There was a lot. So I was like, I think this needs to be a 2-part too. So this one's going to be a 2-parter. And I did something a little different with this one. So I'm going to read the intro and then I'm going to cue up the video. And this video actually has a voiceover in it. So at points, I will stop the voiceover to make commentary, Mystery Science Theater style. So it'll be an interesting change of pace. So let's get started, shall we? Hello, everyone who is joining. So our subject for today is someone that's a little different, someone that people may not be super duper familiar with, which really kind of surprises me because his story is so crazy. It's so all over the map. It's so like, it's one of those where if there wasn't documentation of these facts at points, it doesn't sound real. It's something that sounds manufactured, like it could have spewed out of Hollywood, like 100%. He's very little known, so let's get into this a little bit. He was a remorseless and vicious killer, a predator and rapist who loathed all of mankind, especially himself. He once claimed that the only way to reform a man was to kill him. Ray of sunshine, I know. A victim of an antiquated penal justice system and systematic childhood abuse, but simultaneously one of America's most ferocious and unrepentant serial killers. But much about his life and crimes are pretty much unknown today, and would not have actually been known were it not for the kind acts of a man much opposed to Panzram himself. a young jailer by the name of Henry Lesser, who encouraged Carl Panzram to write his life story to put it to paper. These letters and pages penned by the killer himself and smuggled out of the jail by Henry Lesser are now held in the archives at San Diego State University, and they provide an insight into the mind of a criminal and how a man like Panzram is made. So let's get into it. And also keep an ear open for the quotes by Panzram himself. You might recognize the voice, and I will, you know what? I will send a mug to the first person to guess it. Let's make this a little interesting. All right, so let's do this. I have not done the file sharing yet, so we're going to see how well this works. Hi, lab. Hello. I'm going to do the file sharing to see. Okay. Boom. Look at that. Okay.
In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I've committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all of these things, I am not in the least bit sorry.
On a scaffold at the end of a rope in the exercise yard at Leavenworth Prison is where Carl Panzram ended. But where did he begin? He was born on June 28, 1891, to Prussian immigrants on a desolate farm in northern Minnesota. He had 6 older siblings, 5 brothers and a sister, but claimed that they were honest and dedicated farmers, but none of that honesty and dedication to be a good soul had been passed on to him. Quote, "I have been a human animal ever since I was born. I was a thief and a liar," Panzram claimed. "The older I got, the meaner I got." Unquote. At age 7, his parents separated, and life became even more of a struggle for the family who worked sunup to sundown just to keep the farm running.
Okay, so side note, that sounds terrible, and that does not sound like any fun. Why is it that a lot of these people came from, like, a farm where they did nothing but work and have no fun, and everything was terrible? Or was it just like it that back then? Was that just, like, the way things were? And honestly, like, I did see Cassie's comment, and then I saw fake Jason, oddly enough, said it right. You guys, like, said it at the same time. So, to be fair, you guys both got it simultaneously. I will send both of you mugs. So please send me your information. It was basically a tie. I will send you a Dead Hours mug. I think I did a Murder Corner mug. So whichever of you're choosing. I think I did a mug for both. But we'll see. Yeah, life sucked back then, apparently. Life was just toil and terrible until you died. And that was it. So that's fun. I'm like, we just, got old and not Minnesota. No, okay. If I'm going to knock a state, it's going to be Wisconsin, because that is where Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer are both from. And as we all know how that turned out. With eating people and wearing their faces. No cap. Weird. Hi, Tamara. So let's get back into it, shall we?
During these formative years, Panzram claimed his older brothers took any excuse or reason to beat him, no matter the insignificance of the infraction. He also suffered from earaches and ear problems through most of his youth, to the point that he had mastoid surgery at his own kitchen table because his family couldn't afford to take him to a doctor or a hospital. Such a delicate surgery on a formative brain and chemical balance may not have helped matters for young Carl.
So yes, you heard that correctly. He had mastoid surgery, which is the area back here behind the ear. There is a mass back here that can be taken out, especially if you have earaches a lot or if you're very prone to earaches. I believe it's part of your lymph system, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. They'll put tubes in your ears a lot of times if your ears are having trouble draining. But he literally had a part of his ear and not external ear, but a gland behind his ear removed. So part of people's doubt of Panzram's account, because as you well know, criminals do like to inflate the things they do, right? They like to embellish. They like to add on things that may not have happened. And where this was, people are like, man, maybe he didn't do all the things he said he did, because it is pretty fantastical. One of the things that definitely confirms, because he admits to having this surgery in his autobiography, there is confirmation of that in one of his juvenile record forms when he ends up at the state school, which we're going to learn about shortly. When he was admitted, on the form, it asks if there are any noticeable scars, and it does say one behind his left ear. So it confirms the fact that he was telling the truth about that. Now, whether he told the truth about everything in the autobiography, well, that remains to be seen. But most of the facts can be corroborated.
At age 11, he broke into a neighbor's home and stole everything he could stuff into his pockets, including a large handgun. His brothers found out about the larceny and beat him severely. He was later arrested for the break-in and burglary and sentenced at the tender age of 12 years old to the Minnesota State Training School in Red Wing, Minnesota, a reform school for troubled youths. The school, basically a juvenile prison where half the day was spent in remedial classes and the other half of the day was spent doing hard labor, was populated by about 300 young boys from the ages of 10 to 20. The inmates were under the supervision of the staff, who taught under a strict Christian demerit system, with little to no outside supervision as to the punishments that were handed down to the young men who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. This allowed a level of abuse and corporal punishment that can barely be fathomed today. Panzram himself even recounts that one of the buildings out back behind the school was cynically referred to as the paint house, not because it was where painting material was stored, but it was where boys would be taken to be severely beaten for not following or violating the rules, their bodies painted black and blue.
You heard that correctly, ladies and gentlemen. He's, she's, and theys. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Painted black and blue. So it was colloquially referred to as the paint house, but it was not because of painting. It would because of beating. That is a level of I don't know what kind of fuckery. The highest limits of fuckery, honestly. Like, and this was at a state school. I mean, it's basically a jail. Let's think of it this way. It is basically a jail. It's juvie for kids up to 20. But there is no way that level of anything would fly these days. Not with, I mean, people can get pissed off at social media and media in general and media coverage of things. But I will say one thing positively for the influence of the 24-hour news cycle and social media is that this shit it could never happen again, because it would be covered from the world over and everyone would know about it in 5 minutes and it would stop immediately, where unfortunately this stuff was pretty freaking common back then.
Panzram's admission log in October of 1903 lists his charges as incorrigibility and describes his relationship with his parents as quarrelsome. Though these minor acts of frustration would now be seen in a modern light as an abused child lashing out, who may have been able to be corrected with proper reinforcement, the school in Red Wing seemed to care little about actually reforming young offenders, preferring to punish them instead with severe beatings for any minor infraction. And while Carl Panzram acted out a lot while in school, earning as many as 25 total infraction tickets for varying acts like throwing food or not being able to read properly, the punishments were always the same. And the Christian overtones that were harped on by school officials served only to anger Panzram further. And
he hated religion, like hated it. Like he hated religion like a fat kid hates salad. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, there's various quotes, if you ever look up quotes from Carl Panzram about his hatred and his aversion to Christianity, basically because Jesus was beat into him at a young age. He says one of the quotes is, he loves Jesus so much he wishes he could crucify him all over again. If that gives you an idea of the man that we are dealing with. Yes, read properly was one of the reasons that he got beaten. So he says that he says that basically because I was dumb, he claims in his autobiography, he's like, I was dumb and I just wasn't good at school. And I didn't get a lot of formal training because he was homeschooled, basically. Like, he was raised on a farm. He didn't go to school. He was homeschooled by his parents, and he was just a slow learner. So he was punished for that at this school. Like, it's a school, though. Why would... None of this makes any kind of sense to me. It makes zero amount of sense. As a matter of fact, he says in his autobiography at one point, he says, because I was basically so stupid, they stopped teaching me. He's like, I just ended up doing hard labor. They didn't even bother having me in classes anymore. I got pulled out of all classes and all I did was work because I guess these days it's possible he could have had like ADD or like a learning disability or something like that. But obviously that was not a thing back then. Or it's a thing, but like it was not a recognized thing. Apparently the only thing that was good for fixing children was beating the shit out of them. So let's continue.
Turned him against religion as a whole. He attempted an escape once from the laundry room window that had been left open, but was quickly caught and returned and, quote, beaten nearly to death. He claimed to also have been sexually abused and sodomized during this time by staff and other inmates. The more beatings he endured, the more filled with hatred and rage he became. He was hit with wooden planks, belts, heavy paddles, and leather straps. But all the while, Carl was plotting his revenge and what he might do to the world when he left the school behind. Quote, I first began to think that I was being unjustly imposed upon. Then I began to hate those who abused me. Then I began to think that I would have my revenge just as soon and as often as I could injure someone else. Anyone at all would do, unquote, he later said. One of his small acts of vengeance while at the school was to burn down the infamous paint house, which he did, laughing in his bunk all the while at the spectacle of sweet revenge. By 1905, Carl had learned that acts of violence and defiance got him nowhere, but instead it was deceit that would finally free him from the horrors of the Minnesota State Training School. He had come to learn to say and repeat the things that staff wanted to hear, and when he appeared before the parole board, he convinced them that he was a changed boy and had been reformed by the school. Quote, I was reformed all right. I had been taught by Christians how to be a hypocrite, and I had learned more about stealing, lying, hating, burning, and killing, he said.
Can we just recognize for a second that it is possibly the most baller thing anybody has said ever? And the fact that he was like, this is messed up that they have a shed where they basically take kids to go beat them, and I'm going to burn it down. Like, there's a lot of messed up stuff that this guy has done, and I would like to root for this person, but I can't because of other things, and you'll understand why. But I was just like, there's times that I'm like, good for you, Carl. Good for you. Heck yeah. Hey, Cody, what's going on? So yeah, like I'm very torn because he's a terrible human being. He is a terrible person. But there's times like that I'm like, yeah, fuck him up, Carl. Carl, fuck him up. Very, very torn.
He would return home but didn't stay for long. His mother's health was weak due to the loss of one of Carl's older brothers in a tragic drowning accident, and she didn't have the time nor the emotional fortitude to deal with such a rebellious child. Not that there was much love lost there. Carl said that he first liked and respected his mother, but slowly grew to despise her as he did everyone else who mistreated him. He had known nothing much in his brief life so far besides beatings, violence, and deception. And with no more family life at home to speak of, there was nothing more holding him or his rage back.
I fully decided when I left there just how I would live my life. I made up my mind that I would rob, burn, destroy, and kill everywhere I went, and everybody I could, as long as I lived.
It was 1906, and Carl Panzram was about to be unleashed on the world. At the age of 14, he became a hobo, riding the rails and sleeping in train cars. He begged for food and stole it where he could. Though a life outside of the farm in a big world was just as unforgiving as the walls of the state training school had been. And in the underground jungle of the homeless and vagabond community, there was no lack of criminals, nor predators in search of vulnerable prey. Shortly after he left Minnesota, Carl hopped aboard a freight train with 4 men who had been sleeping in a lumber car. They claimed they could get him new clothes and a place to sleep, but, quote, first they wanted me to do something for them, Panzram recounted, and what they could not get by persuasion, they took by force, unquote. He claimed to have been gang raped by the 4 men. He escaped with his life, but the incident seemed to destroy any feelings of empathy or compassion the young man may have had left. I left that box a sadder, sicker, but wiser boy than when I went in it, he would later state in his autobiography.
Okay, so do I need to say it? Do I need to fucking say it? Fuckery. Such, like, I'm just, like, reading this, got, like, watching documentaries or reading stuff going, people wonder why this man turned out this way? Like, is there a mystery that I have yet to solve? Like, I think we cracked the chestnut, y'all. Like, I think that distinctly, yes. And I agree, Tamara, we need more mental health because honestly, like, this could have been solved before it got to this point with some adequate mental health care, but that was not a thing back then. This is actually one of the letters that he wrote from Leavenworth Prison way later on to Henry Lesser, who he maintained a friendship with basically until the end of his life, which is weird for this man who just hated everyone. He was like basically the equivalent of a human alley cat that fought everybody its whole life, did not want to be touched, just mistrusted everyone, had been kicked, stepped on, but formed this relationship with this guard who treated him like a human being. And that was what started their friendship. Like, he would talk to Panzram like he was a person and not talk down to him like he was a criminal or a piece of trash. So this is one of the letters that he wrote to him on his second imprisonment in Leavenworth, but we'll get there. Also, can we just recognize for a second, before I start this again, can we recognize for a second how good Jason's performance is in this? I kind of wish he was in the live right now so we could shout him out, but Jason Spencer from The Haunted Side playing Carl Panzram tonight, you guys. I listened to his clips and went, Jason, you sound legitimately terrifying. Legitimately terrifying.
Sodomy and rape would become a staple of Panzram's crimes throughout the remainder of his life wherever he went. He would later claim to have sodomized at least 1,000 men, especially during his time as a hobo, as these were the victims available to him. He claimed he didn't care if they were young or old, black or white. All that mattered to him was that they were human, and that he was able to take his unquenchable rage at being a victim out on others. A short time later, Panzram would be arrested in Butte, Montana for burglary, and received a 1-year sentence at the Montana State Reform School. Even at the young age of 14, Carl Panzram was a walking pile of intimidation. He was described as having the body of a man and weighed almost 180 pounds. He quickly drew the eye of the staff as a troublesome and defiant inmate, though one guard seemed to specifically decide to make a point out of harassing Panzram and making his life as miserable as possible.
That sounds like a bad idea. You already know this guy is... Okay. So, first and foremost, there's a lot to unpack there. This is the jail cell at Oregon State Penitentiary, I believe, that he was held in, which we'll get to in a little bit. But you see this man, and he's not even really a man yet. He's 14. He's still junior high age. Walks into this jail, 180 pounds, already the size of a grown-ass dude, and you look at him and go, that's the one I want to fuck with right there. That's the one I want to fuck with. Like, do you have a death wish, sir? Sir, do you want to be just nerf or nothing out of this mortal coil? Like, I mean, I've heard of people wanting to get out of work, but that's a little extreme. I mean, let me pick out the biggest, most hateful inmate I can find and poke the proverbial bear. Yep, let's see how that's going to turn out, shall we?
He kept on nagging me until I finally decided to murder him, Panzram would later recollect. He found a heavy wooden plank outside of one of the workshops, and one night, when the guard turned his back, Panzram bludgeoned him over the top of his head. He was punished for the assault, but had decided that he had had enough of prison life and meant to escape, even if it meant his own death. In 1907, Panzram and another inmate, Jimmy Benson, escaped the school. The pair stuck together for about a month, committing various crimes like theft and the arson of churches, which Panzram always claimed was one of his favorite crimes, and took pleasure burning down churches throughout his criminal life. He would enlist in the military not long after, but constantly drunk and impossible to control, Panzram was unable to conform to military discipline, and over the first month he was in uniform, was jailed several times for petty offenses.
Wow, shocker. The guy who can't handle jail rules can't handle military rules either. Quelle surprise. I mean, is anyone shocked by that? Certainly not I. Not I at all. So then he was like, I already bashed a guy over the head for messing with me. I'm just going to escape jail now. I'm done. Goodbye. This man's life was a roller coaster of nonsense. All right, continue.
In April 1908, he broke into the quartermaster's building and stole clothes worth about $88. He attempted to go AWOL with the stolen goods, but was caught by military police and court-martialed. He was found guilty and dishonorably discharged and sentenced to hard labor for 3 years at Fort Leavenworth Prison, a federal prison in Kansas. Secretary of War and future President William Howard Taft signed the approval of the sentencing. It wasn't the last time that Carl Panzram and Taft would cross paths, nor was it the last time he would be behind bars at Leavenworth. He would enter the gray and forbidding walls of this federal fortress at the age of only 16, and as no one knew of his young age, he was treated like any other adult male inmate. Guards invoked a strict code of conduct and mandatory obedience. A common practice in prisons of this day was a code of silence. All labor and daily business was to be conducted silently, and if an inmate was caught talking out of turn, he could be whipped and placed in solitary confinement. Any infraction, even the smallest, was punished harshly and without delay. Torture and cruel punishments were often enacted against inmates because institutions of the day were ran with little to no oversight by any governing bodies. Torturing prisoners was commonly thought to be a way to keep control over the population, by breaking men's wills and making them fear. Neither of these worked for Carl Panzram.
Again, shocker. Intimidating the human mountain did not work? Wow. Weird. So, the fact that you are badassery enough to enter a federal prison at 16. Yeah, let's just scare this dude straight. No. It's not gonna work. No. I mean, okay. So, wow, like, this, again, he's only 16 and he's already been incarcerated 3 times. One of those times at a federal prison. And it is correct, the jails and prisons, especially back in those days, there was like no prison oversight. There was no federal oversight. There was no nothing. They were basically left to just run themselves. So it was pretty common practice to just kind of do whatever you wanted to do to the inmates. Like, you could literally just torture them to your heart's content and no one was going to stop you. So things like Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile, which of course are fiction, the portrayal of the prison system in that time period was not fictionalized at all. That was accurate. So you had a lot of sadistic guards that like to take their mommy and daddy issues out on inmates because they could, basically. Yeah, investigation, here we come, right, Sean? If I could get you guys into Leavenworth, I will have just made my money for the rest of time as a location scout, but let's get into it.
After suffering numerous beatings and whippings, Panzram resolved to escape, but was unsuccessful. Instead, he burned down one of the prison workshops, causing about $25,000 worth of damages.
That's $25,000 worth of damages in like 1907 money, which would be like $250,000 to $400,000 now. Also, The reason he couldn't escape Fort Leavenworth is because it is a literal fucking military fortress. Like, this man looked at the walls and went, I could do it. I could do it. He was never charged for this crime, but was constantly in trouble for breaking a multitude of other prison rules. He was chained to a 50-pound weight that he had to do everything with, include sleep in. He was assigned to breaking rocks in a quarry as part of his sentence of hard labor, which he did for about 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Panzram claimed that the only benefit of this was that he grew muscular and strong, yet he grew even more bitter and angry and was consumed by vengeance and what he would do when he was released.
I was discharged from that prison in 1910. I was the spirit of meanness personified. Well, I was a pretty rotten egg before I went there. But when I left there, all the good that may have been in me had been kicked and beaten out of me.
Upon his release in 1910, Carl Panzram had nowhere to go. At only 19, he had already spent a majority of his life in and out of prisons and other justice institutions, and they had molded him into the hardened, hateful man he became. He never expressed any desire to start a family or to meet women as a normal young man his age might do. The years of torture and mental and physical abuse had taken their toll. For the next few years, he became a drifter, changing his name multiple times as he made his way across Kansas, Texas, through the Southwest, and into California. He was arrested several times under the alias Jeff Baldwin for vagrancy, arson, larceny, and burglary. He would change aliases multiple times, leaving a trail of chaos and crime wherever he went.
Or for the lesser-known crime of burglar, larceny, arsony. Like, 100%. And yes, thank you. Thank you. Like, I heard those clips and I went, that is amazing, dude. Do you need to talk, though? Because, like, that was really, like, spot on. Yeah, and correct. Like, if he was 16 while he was in Leavenworth, maybe he thought he could do anything. He had that whole, like, I'm immortal and I can freaking do anything. It's entirely possible, like, that he did. But at 19, he's basically already spent more than half of his life in jail. Burgle, larceny, arsony? I'll type it out. Oh, yes. And Jason is awesome. Yes, he is.
He would be arrested several more times between 1911 and 1913, before finally being arrested for trying to sell a stolen watch. He was sentenced under the alias Jefferson Baldwin to 7 years at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. Carl Panzram and his surly, uncooperative attitude didn't seem to concern the prison guards in the least. The prison in Salem was notorious for using torture and physical abuse to keep its inmates in line. They would be stripped naked and sprayed full force with a fire hose, or hung from the rafters by their wrists and whipped for any infraction. This was also the location of what was colorfully known as the snorting pole. It was a pole where an inmate was chained up by his wrists and whipped with a cat of nine tails, which excoriated and tore the skin tissue off of the back. It was said that the pain was so intense it would cause a man to jump and breathe heavily to resist screaming, hence why it was called the snorting pole.
What in the sauteed triple fried fuck? Excuse me. No. Like, I heard about that and my head whipped around. I was watching a documentary on it, which I will plug at the end of this episode before part 2. My head whipped around and I went, like, what? You chained somebody up and beat them with a cat of nine tails, which a cat of nine tails, if no one knows, is a studded whip. It is a leather whip with multiple whips on it. It has like 10 or 15 different leather strands, and it has knots in the leather. Sometimes they are studded with metal. Sometimes they are studded with glass. Pirates used to use them in punishment for infractions on a pirate ship because it tears the skin and muscle tissue off the back and obviously produces pretty intense scarring. So they would, at an American prison, chain somebody up by their wrists and beat them with a cat of nine tails. And it was called the snorting pole because they would breathe in heavily and grunt and try to suppress screaming. And then, but why? And did any? This just seems like, why would you, like, making the Hulk mad? Oh, no, you won't like him when he's angry. Like, did this seem like a good idea to do to this man? I don't. Nothing else has broken him since, like, before and after. Like, yeah, no, let's tie him up and rip the skin off his back and see how that goes. Oh, yeah, that's not going to make him more mad. It's not going to make him want to murder all of you. Panzram was constantly in trouble and swore he would never fulfill the entirety of the 7-year sentence. Despite being severely beaten and tortured, he continued his raucous behavior, earning himself quite the reputation. He started several fires and burned down 3 prison buildings at different times. He also spent 61 days in solitary confinement, where he groped around in a dark cell and ate cockroaches for sustenance to stay alive. In early 1917, Panzram helped another inmate, Otto Hooker, escape from the prison. Hooker would later shoot and kill the cruel, sadistic warden of the prison, Warden Harry Minto, when he ran afoul of him in a neighboring town. The killing of the warden by an escaped convict sparked a public outcry, and conditions at the Oregon State Penitentiary got even worse. By September 1917, Carl Panzram had already made several escape attempts by cutting through the bars of his cell. On September 18th, he finally escaped, but it was short-lived. A few days later, a police officer would recognize Panzram from his wanted poster and attempted to arrest him. A shootout ensued, but Panzram would run out of ammunition and was recaptured after a struggle. He was returned to Oregon State and dumped in solitary, but wouldn't remain there for long. Amazingly, on May 12th, he would escape again, sawing through his prison bars with a hacksaw blade and jumping from prison walls while the guards fired at him. Panzram would escape into the wilderness. It was then that he decided to change his name to another alias, John O'Leary. He shaved his mustache and began methodically making his way to the East Coast, burglarizing and burning churches the whole way. In the summer of 1920, Carl Panzram had resurfaced again. Okay, so the man escapes from a badass prison. And let's recap a little bit, because 61 days spent in solitary confinement where there is no light and you're having to eat roaches to stay alive will drive anybody crazy. And that has been proven, which is why they don't do solitary confinement like that anymore, because it will literally fuck with someone's sanity. Like, you will go insane. So if he wasn't already crazy before this, he is definitely crazy after. Yeah. This time in New Haven, Connecticut. He seemed to prefer larger towns and cities, as usually the police force would be too distracted by other crimes to bother him. When he wasn't mugging and raping young, drunk transients, he was looking for houses to rob. In August, he came across one that looked fat and ready for the taking. He broke into the stately home through a window and began to ransack the bedrooms. In a den, he would find a large amount of jewelry, bonds, and a .45 automatic handgun. The name on the bonds was listed as William H. Taft, the same man and now former president who had sentenced Panzram to 3 years at Leavenworth Prison in 1907. After stealing anything of value he could carry, Panzram escaped the house through the same window he entered by and hit the streets. He would make his way to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where he would fence the jewelry and sell the bonds, getting about $3,000 cash for the stolen goods. Money which he then turned around to use to purchase a yacht. Because why the fuck not buy a yacht when you have stolen bonds from a former president of the United States? This guy is YOLOing all up and down the fucking East Coast right now. Like, he's just like, I robbed a former president. I stole his gun. I'm going to sell all his shit and buy myself a boat. Yes, and he does look like Jude Law. I really feel like they should do an actual, like, I've seen a documentary, but I really feel like they should do an actual, like, high-budget Hollywood movie of Carl Panzram. Kind of like they did with Bronson, with, oh God, I can't remember his name. If anyone's seen the Bronson movie, like, you know who I'm talking about. Like, do an actual Hollywood budget one, and Jude Law should play it because he looks a lot like him, just saying. Also, my friend Chris, who's an actor, looks a lot like Carl Panzram, but don't tell him I said that. Called the Akista. He would sail the boat up and down the East River, along the way breaking into dozens of other boats, stealing anything he could get his hands on. But seeing all the freight and sailors coming and going off the docks,
Carl Panzram devised another scheme for murder.
Then I figured it would be a good plan to hire a few sailors to work for me. Get them out on my yacht, get them drunk, commit sodomy on them, rob them, and then kill them. This I done.
For several weeks, Panzram would scout for sailors looking for work, telling them that he had work available for them aboard his yacht and he was in dire need of deckhands. He would invite them aboard, wine and dine them, and then wait for them to fall asleep. And while they were sleeping, then blow their brains out with the .45 Colt automatic he had stolen from Taft's home. He would then tie a rock to the body and dispose of it in the sea. He claimed to have disposed of at least 10 men this way. The scheme would work for about 3 weeks before people began to become suspicious of the Akista and its strange captain. Panzram realized it was time to change his venue. He took his last 2 passengers and sailed down the coast of New Jersey, where he intended to kill both of them. But such murderous plans were interrupted by a huge gale that hit suddenly and smashed the Akista against the rocks, sinking the vessel. Panzram swam to shore, barely escaping with his life. The 2 passengers escaped also, making their way to shore before disappearing, never knowing how close they had come to death at the barrel of a former president's gun. In 1921, Panzram would serve 6 months in jail in Bridgeport, Connecticut for burglary and possession of a loaded handgun. When he was released, he got involved with a maritime union that was in the midst of a labor strike. Union hardliners had gotten into a brawl with strikebreakers, and Panzram was quickly rearrested for having a running gun battle with the police. He jumped bail, fled Connecticut, and a few days later stowed away on a ship bound for Angola, a Portuguese colony in West Africa.
This man just seriously jumped. Like, what else could this guy do? Like, I was reading this and going over this and going, what? That's why when I said this sounds made up, because it sounds made up. It doesn't sound like one person could do all these things, but here we are. Also, accurate. I was like, yes, I am here for it, though. It is an amazing performance. He was like, do I need to re-record this? And I was like, no, we're good. That was like spot on. So good luck watching Haunted Side videos now and not hearing this voice. He would find work with the Sinclair Oil Company and become a foreman on an oil or Cemetery Road videos and hearing that voice and hearing Jason talk about sailors and breaking out of prison.
Drilling rig. But his desire for death and chaos followed him even to these foreign shores. It was in Africa that he would rape and murder an 11-year-old boy, bashing his head in with a rock. After the murder, Panzram went back to Libido Bay on the Atlantic coast, where he would live for several weeks in a fishing village. The locals suspected him of murder, but didn't have any solid proof. Yet it didn't stop Panzram from hiring 6 able-bodied locals to take him into the jungle in order to, quote-unquote, hunt crocodiles. But hunting crocodiles was never what Panzram really had in mind. He killed all 6 men by shooting them to death, then one by one feeding their bodies to the crocodiles in the river. After this, though, he realized his time in Libido Bay was going to be short-lived, since many people had witnessed him leaving on the boat with 6 men, but returning alone. He would head up the Congo to the Gold Coast and rob local farmers to get enough money to book passage on a ship to the Canary Islands. Finding no worthy targets there to rob, he would immediately stow away on a ship bound for Lisbon, Portugal. But much to his dismay, when he arrived in the city, the local government had already been made aware of his crime spree in Africa, and the local police were warned to be on the lookout for him. He managed to hide aboard another ship, and by 1922, he was back on U.S. soil. Panzram marveled at how easy it was for him to kill people, and imagined himself going into business as a professional hitman. He brought the gun he had used to commit murders back in the Congo with him to the States and had it fitted with a silencer. But when testing it later, found that, much to his dismay, it still made quite a loud noise. If that heavy-calibered pistol and the silencer had only worked as I thought it would, I would have gone into the murder business on a wholesale scale, he wrote years later.
Okie dokie. So, to recap, runs away to Africa, kills a child, rapes and kills a child, kills 6 men, one by one shooting them, feeds them to crocodiles, robs farmers, gets to the Canary Islands, stows aboard another ship, gets to Portugal, and somehow gets home, and his first thought is, I want to be a hitman. The cojones on this human being, I cannot with this man. Hello, excuse me, sir, where did you get permission? Where? Because I'm going to need receipts. I need proof of purchase for this. Because that's your first thought. You get back to America basically by the skin of your teeth, having almost gotten caught by angry locals and the Portuguese police. And your first thought is, I should kill people for a living. The audacity, sir. Excuse me. How dare you? And why? And no. His life of crime and chaos incarnate caused Panzram to be forever on the move, never settling in one place for long, knowing that the authorities were always likely looking for him. After a few days back in the States, Panzram went to the U.S. Customs Office where he retrieved his captain's license and the papers for his wrecked yacht, the Akista. He planned on stealing another boat and refitting it under the Akista's name, so he began drifting through the local boat yards in the New York area and wandered up the coast before drifting into Providence, Rhode Island. He could not seem to find a ship that resembled the Akista, though, so he continued north into Boston and then eventually arrived in Salem, Massachusetts. It was there, on a hot afternoon of July 18th, 1922, that he would encounter a 12-year-old boy walking alone. I'm sorry, I had to stop for a second. Accurate. Do what you love and the work will follow, I guess. Continuing. The boy's name was George McMahon, and he had spent much of the day in a neighbor's restaurant until the owner asked him to run an errand for her. About 2:15, I sent him to the A&P store for milk, giving him 15 cents, she later told the court. George left the restaurant and walked up Boston Street. About an hour later, another neighbor, Mrs. Margaret Crean, saw George walking up the avenue with a stranger. In the afternoon of July 18th, while sitting in front of a window in my home, I saw a boy and a man walking up the avenue. The man was dressed in a blue suit and wore a cap, she said later. That man was Carl Panzram. Panzram would accompany the child to the store, where he was even brazen enough to speak to the clerk. A few minutes later, he convinced young George to accompany him on a trolley ride, departing the trolley in a deserted side of town about an hour later. It was there that Carl Panzram told George McMahon he was going to die. He claimed to have stayed with the youth for about 3 hours, repeatedly sexually assaulting him before beating him to death with a rock. He also claimed to have stuffed several sheets of paper torn from a magazine down the boy's throat. He would cover the body with branches and flee, but not before being spotted by 2 witnesses who took note of the frantic stranger. Immediately following the murder, Panzram headed back to New York City. The boy's body would be discovered 3 days later. The murder was headline news for weeks, but it would remain unsolved for many years, until the day in 1928 when those same 2 witnesses would see Panzram again while he was in custody for another murder in Washington, D.C. During the early summer of 1923, Panzram made his way back to Providence, Rhode Island, where he stole a boat out of one of the many marinas around the bay. By then, he was an accomplished sailor who had navigated the seas in dozens of countries in all sorts of weather conditions. He set sail for Long Island Sound, an area that he was familiar with and where he felt comfortable. Panzram docked at New Haven for weeks at a time and would go out at night, cruising the streets for victims to rob and rape. Young man, there's no need to feel down, I said, young man. Yeah, you know how that song goes. I'm not going to sing any more of it. I don't want to pay royalties. Anyways, so later on, as you'll see, this is an article from a paper out of Stamford, Connecticut. I gotta love when everybody feels like, what? I'm sorry. Do you think that everybody needs to hear the engine of your vehicle? Like, what part of you thinks that I need to hear, I have a small dick, like, as you tear down the street? Like, I'm not, no. Yeah, nobody ever asked for that. So, excuse me. But in this article, as you'll see in a little bit, he totally does, claims that he's from Nevada, and I was like, sir, pardon me, sir. And I was like trying to like narrow in on the article because I was like, what town is he talking about in Nevada? Like, where did he mean? The only thing I could think of, because I was like, there is no place that I'm aware of called Filte? Philalabala? Like, I don't know what that town that is, but I'm like, maybe he meant Rhyolite, but I was like, I don't know if it was still functional at that time. It may have been, but I think either that or he just fucking made up a town. I don't know. Over the next few weeks, he burglarized homes and boats in Connecticut. He stole jewelry, cash, guns, and clothes. Off Premium Point in the city of New Rochelle, he broke into a large yacht that was moored offshore. He stole a .38 caliber handgun from the galley, and when he checked the papers on board, he found that the police commissioner of New Rochelle owned the vessel. In 1923, June, he sailed the ship he had stolen up the Hudson River to Yonkers, where he docked overnight. There, he picked up George Wallison and told the youth that he needed a deckhand to assist with some work on the ship. Later that same night, he would sexually assault the young man. They sailed upriver to Kingston, where Panzram moored the yacht in a small bay off the Hudson River. He quickly repainted the hull and changed the name on the stern. Then he ventured onto shore and visited the local hangouts to attempt to find a buyer. Soon he had found himself a sucker who agreed to come take a look at the prospective vessel. Panzram took the buyer out to the yacht on the night of June 27th, where they had a few drinks together. But the man had other things on his mind. There he tried to stick me up, but I was suspicious of his actions and was ready for him, Panzram said. He shot the man twice in the head using the same gun that he had stolen from the police commissioner's boat. He then tied a metal weight onto the body and threw the man overboard. He's still there yet, as far as I know, Panzram confessed later. I was going to say, did he give him the old Mike Tyson 1-2 and, like, fucking knock him overboard? No, he just shot him. Just shot him, tied a fucking metal weight to him and bloop into the water. I'm like, wow. Like, and this was like close to the 20s. So this was in the 20s, 23. I know that during the era of Prohibition, things got a little wild and out. But it sounds like to me that during this era, and I've talked to somebody about this was just like the Wild West almost all over again, because there were so many like gangsters hitting the big time around this time, bank robbers during the Depression and stuff like that, like Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson. Like, I feel like it was just the Wild West all over again in the 20s to 30s. And I was like, oh, I would have 100% been a gangster mall knocking over fucking banks. You better believe it. But I'm just like listening to this thing, and I'm like listening to documentaries and watching things and reading stuff and going, the era of lawlessness was just, you think the 70s and 80s were bad because there were no cell phones and there's no GPS and there's nobody tracking everybody's shit and there's no DNA stuff. Like, it was even crazier back then. Like, you could have literally, like, this man's life was insane. Nobody needs to know how small your dick is. Thank you. Thank you. I have an Air Force base not too far from my house. So I have literally these fucking Chair Force motherfuckers driving up and down like they are Maverick from Top Gun. And I am done. I am done with this nonsense. I'm like, you work at an air base that flies drones. You don't fly anything. So you need to calm down right now with that nonsense. Excuse me, sir. The very next morning, Panzram and his passenger, George Wallison, who had witnessed the killing, sailed out of the bay, heading downriver. They docked the same day in Poughkeepsie. Panzram went on shore and stole a quantity of fishing nets worth more than $1,000. They set sail again and cruised across the river to Newburgh. After the boat dropped anchor, George jumped ship and swam to shore. He eventually made his way back to Yonkers the next day and told police about being sexually assaulted by Panzram. Yonkers police alerted all the Hudson River towns to be on the lookout for a Captain John O'Leary, who was sailing a 38-foot yacht downriver. Cops still did not know that the boat was stolen out of Providence. Panzram made it as far as the village of Nyack. He secured the yawl at Peterson's boatyard and bedded down for the night. But the local cops were vigilant, and on the morning of June 29, 1923, they boarded the yacht and arrested Panzram. He was charged with sodomy, burglary, and robbery. The next day, Yonkers detectives John Fitzpatrick and Charles Ward motored upriver on a municipal ferry to pick him up. He was placed in the Yonkers City Jail, awaiting court appearance. On his arrest card, O'Leary listed his occupation as seafarer. He said he was born in Nevada and gave his age as 40.
On the evening of July 2nd, he would attempt to escape from the city jail with another inmate by attempting to pry the bars out of the masonry using a piece of the bed from the cell. The tampering was thwarted by guards during a routine cell inspection, and as a result, John O'Leary, alleged river pirate, was placed in solitary confinement.
I have never wanted the phrase more alleged river pirate in my description than I wanted after hearing this. I was like, how did this look directly into my soul and know exactly what I wanted? Like, exactly what I wanted. I met Carl Panzram, all I got was this funny walk. You'll find out why that's funny in part 2. We'll get to that, because there's a whole other, there's another aspect to this. Shit goes sideways in a whole lot of ways. Like, you think this is crazy so far, there is a whole part 2. There is more to this man's life. It's a lot. It's a lot to unpack, y'all.
Panzram, now unable to escape his own way, would turn to his lawyer for help. He would get the attorney to post bail in exchange for the deed to the ship he had been arrested on. The attorney agreed and put up the money. Panzram was released and quickly disappeared. When the lawyer went to register the boat, it was discovered that the boat had been stolen. The police quickly confiscated the ship, and the attorney also lost the posted bail.
Womp
Carl
womp.
Panzram had just conned his own attorney. Larchmont was a quiet, small village on the south shore of Westchester County, a few miles from the Connecticut state line. During the 1920s, it was famous for its beautiful shoreline and exclusive country clubs where the upper echelon of New York society would gather on weekends. They could watch yacht races or shop at the village stores, a world away from the frenzied pace of Manhattan's crowded and gritty streets. Panzram had been to Larchmont before. In June 1923, he stole a boat from the Larchmont Marina belonging to a Dr. Charles Payne. The boat was found a short time later off the coast of New Rochelle. Panzram had lost control of the boat and smashed the craft onto the rocks. On the night of August 26, 1923, Panzram broke into the Larchmont train depot. Using an axe he found outside, he shattered a large window and crawled into the building. He found dozens of suitcases which belonged to passengers for the next day's train. As he was rifling through the baggage looking for items to steal, a Larchmont officer, Officer Richard Gruby, who was making his early morning rounds, happened to come by. I went around to a different window and saw him kneeling in front of the stove in the depot with an open trunk in front of him, and I covered him with a gun, Gruby told reporters. But Panzram didn't hesitate to take the fight to the officer. The Portchester Daily described what happened next. John O'Leary, a giant in stature, and was armed with a murderous-looking axe. The officer immediately grappled with O'Leary, and after a fierce struggle in the dark, disarmed him and placed him under arrest. He was brought to the police station on Boston Road, where he identified himself as John O'Leary. He confessed to previous break-ins, and he was charged with 3 additional burglaries. In court the next morning, the judge set his bail at $5,000 and remanded Panzram to the county jail, pending a grand jury.
Yes, you heard that correctly. He fought a cop with an axe in the dark. In the dark, mama. Like, what? Again, the absolute cojones of this human being. I broke into a train depot and started robbing everyone's luggage. A policeman tried to stop me, and I tried to head chop him. Like, he tried to straight up cancel that policeman's life insurance and send him to God's same-day shipping. Like, with an axe. He brought an axe to a gunfight, y'all. Like, we're almost good. Okay.
As he sat in the village jail, Panzram told the cops he was an escaped prisoner from Oregon, where he was serving a 17-year sentence for shooting a police officer. But Panzram said a lot of things. Maybe too many things. Some cops called him a chiseler, or a man who admits to crimes he didn't commit and hope that he will be moved to another facility or moved to another jail. Larchmont police sent telegrams of inquiry to Oregon to verify Panzram's claims. On August 29th, Larchmont Police Chief William Hines received this reply from Warden Johnston Smith of the Oregon State Penitentiary. Quote, Jeff Baldwin is wanted very badly in Oregon. His was a noted case that attracted considerable attention all over the Pacific coast, and we are very anxious to send an officer for him at the earliest possible moment. unquote. Panzram was known as Jeff Baldwin in Oregon and still had more than 14 years left on his sentence. There was even a $500 cash reward for his capture, which Panzram then tried to collect himself for his own arrest. Quote, O'Leary told the police here that since he volunteered the information as to his escape from prison, he wished to claim the $500 himself, the Standard Star reported. Panzram realized that his future prospects and his freedom was limited. He knew that Oregon wanted him back badly, and he either had to escape or face the next few decades in prison. During his recent trip to the city of Kingston in the Upper Hudson, he'd committed numerous burglaries and robberies, some of which were never discovered. While he was held in the Larchmont jail, Panzram wrote a letter to a mysterious John Romero in Beacon, New York, which was directly across the river from Newburgh, where George Wallison had jumped ship. This will probably be the last you ever hear from me, he wrote. I expect to go to jail for the balance of my life, so you can see I can lose no more. I have never said anything to anyone about you, but bear this fact in mind. If I should talk and tell what I know, I can and will put you away for a long time. Panzram demanded that Romero send him $50 right away, and he would forget all he knew. He said that the boat was lost, but Romero, quote, could still cash in on the Newburgh deal, and that he signed the letter Captain John K. O'Leary. The money never did arrive, and police never found Romero. Panzram remained in custody.
And unfortunately, that is where we have to leave off for this evening until part 2. So, basically, irrefutable logic. Get arrested, my own reward, because I'm that ballsy. Technically, I turned myself in, so money, please. Money, please. Like, wow. So, yeah, things don't really improve for Carl, like, honestly, in part 2. Like, it's just more, it's shenanigans from front to back, y'all. Thanks. If you guys have any questions, let me know in this little brief time before we end. If you guys had any questions on clarification, apologies for the lack of slides. Unfortunately, this was in that era where there were not a lot of photos taken. So all I really have to go off of are some news articles, the photos of the letters that he sent, and his mugshots. There really weren't a lot of photos of him outside of, like, jail, pretty much. So I'm like having to use stock photos of jails and stuff like that. So not a whole lot of slides to show, but trying to space it out so that it doesn't look too boring. Does anyone have any questions? I figure I'll leave you on a cliffhanger for part 2. He did have the sweet sugar-coated audacity all the time. Constantly, this man had this. Like, I've never heard of somebody with, like, I'm just like reading and listening, and I'm like, no, there's no way. And then really? And there's more, and he did more than. Yeah, it's a crazy story. And it's one that I'm like, how do more people not know about this guy? Like, it was a pretty big deal, and, like, he's pretty infamous for his actions and for what the things he's done and being in and out of prison and stuff like that. So I'm really surprised that more people don't know about him or aren't more familiar with his crimes and with him, because it is such a crazy ass story. Yes, burgle, larceny, arsony. You heard it here first. Well, you didn't hear it here first, but it's a combination of the coolest crimes. He's also was a fever dream. Like, did I dream that whole thing with the boat and the Jason being scary and vrooming cars and small dicks? And I don't know what happened. I always think it's funny that I have this one friend, and he will go remain nameless, but his fever dream, speaking of fever dreams, he always had the same fever dream when he was sick. And it was that he was crushed to death by a giant ball of money. Like, that's the same dream he would have every time he had a fever, every time he was sick. He got rolled over by a giant ball of cash, and all that was left behind was a pink scarf. I don't know. I'm like, does that mean you're afraid of money or afraid of death or both? You afraid of being poor? I need to analyze this. Excuse me. Paging Dr. Freud. Excuse me. But yes, like, I'm excited that you guys have learned about Panzram. He's like one of those like ones that, again, that I'm just like fascinated by, but I'm also fascinated that more people have never heard of him. And yes, the pink scarf. The pink scarf is the key. There is a documentary, and it's the only one I've seen that's actually of decent quality that covers a lot of his life. And it's by John Borowski. It's by the same guy that did the Albert Fish documentary. And it's called Carl Panzram, Spirit of Murder and Vengeance. I believe it is on, not Tubi, but it's on one of the free streaming services. So you have to like watch commercials in between. But it's like 2 hours. It's really good. I don't think the voice acting is as good as mine, but I'm just gonna yes. Basically, that was his MO. Pretty much. He was a fan. And it was, the thing is, like, it wasn't so much, obviously, like, because it's more about power than obviously is about sex. Like, it was never about sex for him. It was about the fact that you could dominate other human beings and make them feel the way that you felt when you were a victim. That is 100% what that was about for him. So, which, yeah, I mean, this, and then people are like, so we could reform the prison system so we don't end up with more of these people, but nah, let's not do that. Let's not do that. I mean, he basically said that himself. He was like, if I had had any kind of actual like upbringing with any kind of, you know, care and stuff like that, I probably wouldn't have turned out this way. Is he wrong though? Probably not. Well, if you guys don't have any questions for me, if you think of one later, just kind of post it in the comments below. I will get to work on part 2, and hopefully you'll get to hear Jason read some more creepy quotes for you. There's more. There's a lot more. His most famous quote is the one where he's being hanged, so definitely going to get that one. So good night to everybody. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Murder Corner, and I will see you guys next time. Hopefully next week we'll do part 2, but I don't want to promise anything just because I have a crazy schedule these days, and I will get it written and produced as soon as I can get it to you. So I would rather have quality than quantity, and if I don't think I can get it done to my standard in the amount of time that I'm given, then it might take another week. So thank you for everybody joining us. Thank you for Team Rewatch, which I know some of you are going to get caught up. Please go watch. Please go subscribe to everybody. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. I didn't.